Hello and welcome back to another episode of my Stevenson Weekender sailboat build. In this episode I'm going to get all the electronic components hooked up in the boat. The trolling motor that I purchased is a 24 volt trolling motor, so I'm going to base the whole system on two 12 volt car batteries wired in series. So I'm going to start out here with this 4 gauge wire, making some short cables that I will use to connect the batteries to each other and to this on-off switch, and then ultimately to the positive and negative bus bars that I'll show here in a few minutes. I purchased almost all my supplies on Amazon, and I'll try to put a link to everything in the description. After getting the batteries placed in the front hatch, I installed this onboard charger. This will allow me to keep the boat plugged in when it's at home on the trailer to keep the batteries topped off. This is a 24 to 12 volt converter, since everything other than the trolling motor will run on 12 volts. So in this shot you can see how I have the batteries wired in series. I have the negative of that first battery attached to the positive of the second, and then I have the negative of the second battery going to the negative bus bar, and then the positive of the first battery going to that on-off switch, and then on to the positive bus bar. You can also see the installed voltage converter and a better shot of the onboard battery charger. Now I'm going to run some more of that 4 gauge wire from the bus bars all the way back to the trolling motor. Ultimately I want all the wires to be hidden, so here I'm running the wires using a stick to push the end of the wire under the seat into the back hatch. Here I'm 3D printing a custom designed transom mount for the trolling motor. My original plan was to fabricate a trolling motor mount out of a piece of 1/2 inch aluminum plate, but once I priced that out it was going to be too expensive, so I thought I'd give this a try. I designed this so that it would be through bolted through the transom, and then also with 2 longer bolts down through the top of the mount through the top deck. Once everything was tightened down, the whole structure was quite strong. Rather than permanently mount this trolling motor, I'm going to make it easily removable, so that when the boat is on the trailer and I'm going down the road, I can take the trolling motor off and lay it in the back of the truck. I just think this will be safer, since I don't completely trust that 3D printed mount to take the torque of the motor bouncing up and down going down the road. So here I'm installing a quick connect plug that will allow me to easily take the trolling motor on and off. Now I'll move to the starboard side of the back of the boat and install the transom running light. As I mentioned in one of the very first videos in this series, one of my main goals in building this boat is to be able to do some overnight camping sails with my grandson. Since we'll be camping out at night, then I need these running lights to keep us visible and safe. Here I'm just showing how I did any end-to-end splices. First I'd twist the wires together and then solder them, and then cover them with heat shrink. While I'm back here, I'm going to get the bilge pump and port installed. I bought that through-hole fitting and the bilge pump on Amazon, but I found this one-way flapper valve at my local hardware store, but I really needed a 45-degree angled fitting to come off of those threads onto the hose barb. I looked but couldn't find that fitting anywhere, so I ended up drawing it and printing it on the 3D printer. My apologies, but that space there is just too confined to be able to film anything in it. So here's some shots of the final result. Now I'll move up to the front of the boat and get the port and starboard running lights installed. Once I had all the load components installed, I needed to create a chase in the cabin to hide the wires and also to provide a spot to mount the switch box and fuse box. So here I'm installing these brackets using epoxy, and I use a small dab of hot glue to hold the bracket in place while the epoxy cures. Once the epoxy had cured, I went back and put a bottom piece on each of the brackets and then attached some of that VHB tape I've used before. This just allows me to use less screws to attach the paneling piece. This switch panel has 5 rocker style switches. I'm only going to need 2 at this time, but who knows what I'll add in the future. It also has a USB-A and a USB-C charger and a cigarette lighter style port. Next to the switch panel, I'm going to install a fuse block. This design requires that the wires come out next to the fuse block. I thought that looked kind of unfinished, so I printed a back plate and used some rubber grommets for the wires to come through. As I finish the cabin, I'll get those droopy wires tidied up and put a bottom on the chase. The last thing I installed was this light for the cabin. So once I had everything connected and the fuses put in, then I did a test run of all the components, and they all worked well. So that's it for the electronics for the boat. Let me know in the comments if there's any other things you think I should add. And I hope you'll join me next time as I continue to build the Stevenson Weekender sailboat.